Well, Andy Stanley, I remember him saying once, he was speaking on marriage, and he said that in his experience, people don't really have marriage problems. They have people problems that they just bring into marriage. And I really resonated with that. It really kind of encouraged me because, well, I disciple people. I try to mentor people. I work in counseling, so a lot of the times I'm counseling people who are married. And I myself am single. So I think that in my mind and in other people's minds kind of puts me at a deficit. Like, you can't really relate to what it's like to be married. And I can understand that sentiment. But I also think, well, Jesus wasn't married. Would you not listen to Jesus? So I feel like there are principles that apply just unilaterally. And I think there probably are exceptions and nuances to married life that maybe single people can't totally grasp. But I do think that the problems that occur in marriage occur in single life too. They just look differently. And I think the remedy to problems in married life are the same as remedies to problems in single life. And so I think that there's a vast overlap between the two. And that's kind of what I want to talk to, because I had read an article from Jordan Peterson, and it was actually just a text transcript of an earlier podcast episode he did from several years ago. So rather than reading that article, I'm just going to respond to some of the things he says in the video. But I'd read that and watched that, and I really thought it dovetailed nicely with some of the things that I've been meditating on and thinking on in terms of discipleship and relationships, and then obviously ultimately in marriage. And in the video, he's talking about family dinner, like having that shared meal, having that time together. And so I do want to get right into the video, and I'll just respond throughout it. But I also want to tie it in with some practical advice. There's a guy named John Gottman who, as far as I know, I don't think he's a believer, but we read one of his texts when I was in I think my master's program on marriage, and he has a really good approach, a very scientific way of diagnosing problems in marriage and what's going on in marriage. So that's basically what his career has all been. So I want to read an article from his site as well, and I want to hopefully tie all of this stuff together into hopefully some practical exhortations for discipleship, and why the just fundamental keys of discipleship and mentoring people and developing people's spiritual lives, how those things are essential whether somebody remains single or not. And it's even better if it happens at a younger age, because they learn these skills that are going to help them in marriage. So that being said, let me just jump right into this clip from Jordan Peterson, and I'll put the link, of course, in the show notes to this episode, along with the article to the Gottman from the Gottman site. So here we go.
So the other thing that happens too, and you see this with couples, is that if they have that time together, something analogous to family dinner night, although I think the family dinner idea is a really good one for reasons I'll mention here in a moment, is that what you're doing, imagine your family has a story, and the story is where we came from, where we are, and where we're going together as a unit. And then each of the individuals within that story has a story. And then what you're doing in those family dinners, that interaction time, is you're taking the individual threads of the individual story threads, and you're weaving them together to make the collective story. And that keeps everyone up to date and on the same page, and able to empathize in also a deep manner. Because if I don't know where you are or what you're up to, I can't figure out what you're thinking or feeling.
Okay, so that's a crucial point. If I don't know where you are, I can't figure out what you're thinking or feeling. So he's talking, of course, in a marriage, and he's talking about this family dinner, this time together, and it traditionally has always been the family dinner. That time you spend together at the end of the day. And why is that so beneficial? Well, it's not that there's something magical per se. It's not that just doing that ritual is what will save a marriage or sustain a marriage, but it's the things that are happening during that meal that are aids in helping sustain a relationship. So like what he's talking about is you're telling a story, if you want to use Jordan Peterson's language. Your family is a story, and we resonate with stories. Of course, you could think of popular TV shows like Breaking Bad is a story about a man. Those shows, that are multi-season long storylines. This is a story, so your family is a story. Your life is a story. And when you're sitting down at a meal together with somebody at the end of the day, what you're doing is you're basically, in a way, I don't want to push this analogy of writing a story and your life being a story too far, but it is almost like if you've got multiple people, husband, wife, and 3 kids maybe, that are all writing a story. It's sort of like when you've got a novel that's written by different people. They have to collaborate together to say, like, okay, where's your character at right now? What's he doing? Okay, he's there. What did he just do? Okay, he just did this. So this part that I'm writing has to dovetail to that. I had a friend who wrote Star Trek. She is a published Star Trek, officially stories that she has told for Star Trek are in the Star Trek canon, which is kind of impressive, actually, just to consider that, somebody who actually, I'm not a huge Star Trek fan, but that conceivably her story could be used to inform Star Trek. But the point is, when you've got a massive story like a Star Trek, that is all these things are canon, they are very rigid about what they allow to be written by their official authors. I remember I went to a convention and they were talking about being an author for Star Trek, and they had said they're very, like, the publishers and the people who own the rights to Star Trek or whatever, the Roddenberry family or whoever it is, they're very rigid on, like, if you write something, they'll come in and say things like, no, you can't have Spock say this sentence. That is not something Spock would say. No, Picard would not do this thing. He has to do something else. So all the way down to just how these characters interact. So what these authors have to do in telling these stories is they kind of have to work together. They have to be aware of, what did this author say about this character? Where are they in this timeline? So you're updating. They have to be on the same page. That's what happens when you have those shared meals, and you're doing it every day. And what's important about it, doing it every day. Now, of course, as a counselor, when you're talking with people who are struggling, the goal, if you're wanting to get them to improve their behavior and improve their life, you want to do the most maximum thing that they can do, that they will do. So if you're dealing with a couple or a family that's in trouble, and you tell them you need to start having dinner together every night, that may be too overwhelming. Maybe their schedules are conflicting. Maybe one of them doesn't like to cook. Maybe they don't want to see each other that much. And they're just not going to do that. Just having a regular time. Maybe try for 2 times a week. Pick 2 nights a week that you're going to do that. Maybe once a week. Something. This is also why they talk about couples needing to continue having date nights. This is the same idea. Is what that's doing is it's forcing you to get together and almost like software update, reboot, and catch up where everybody is at. So, excuse me. So, and Jordan Peterson talks about this. When he talks about chaos and order, oftentimes we find ourselves in chaos, meaning we find out we are not where we thought that we were. And that's an element of chaos. It's an element of disaster, disorder. And you feel lost when something like that happens. And so you can imagine, again, a husband and wife who maybe they're not having this daily dinner time. They're not having these regular interactions. So 10 years pass, and then all of a sudden you find out that, the husband's having an affair. He's leading a double life. He's got, a mistress on the side who's pregnant, who has these other things. You think, how in the world did that happen? And then the spouse feels lost. They are nowhere secure where they thought that they were. Their story is not where they thought that it was. Again, going back to something like a Breaking Bad type story, I won't spoil anything, but, imagine how Walter White starts at the beginning of that series. What if you were to show somebody at the beginning of that series, and then you were to show them the final episode where, he's like this massive drug kingpin who's murdered people, and you just think, how in the world does a person get from there to there? Well, there's little steps, every episode it catches you up to how a person gets to that point. But if all of that stuff in between is missing, you're lost. So the family dinner, this time together, it doesn't have to be family dinner. A lot of the times, I'll tell people, and this, of course, is not a unique thought to me. This is just learned wisdom, that even 15 minutes at the end of the day, even if it's not a meal, maybe you don't have a meal together, but you both get home from work and you've got 15 minutes. So you're spending that time, how was your day? What happened? Oh, you told me last week that your coworker was having this issue. Has that been resolved? No, it hasn't. So all of these little things that might be annoying or frustrating, you're constantly updating those things when you're having these small interactions. So you're not 10 years down the line, those things have built up and built up. Your partner, your person you're in a relationship with has had, every day little tiny things that frustrate them and annoy them, and you're unaware of them, and they've built up and built up and built up to now you're in a tragic relationship that you have no idea how it got there. Well, it got there because every single day little things happen. This, when people talk about we grew apart, well, how that happens is you didn't grow together. You were just growing separately. You were leading separate lives and never intertwining that back together. So for married people, this is significant. For single people, this is significant. Now, again, this is significant. And what I try to teach people that I'm mentoring is that's a skill. Like to sit down at a dinner table with your spouse and your children and to listen to what's being said, and he talks about that in this clip, and to respond and to have these like interactions. These are things that, and this is going back to what Andy Stanley said, these are things that can be learned when you're single. So when we're talking about discipleship is, in mentoring, you're partnering up with one or two people, presumably of the same sex. That I don't typically think it's a good idea to be discipling somebody of the opposite sex. So you've developed this relationship with somebody with a goal in mind, where we want to see maturity in Christ. That's our goal. That's what we're aiming towards. That doesn't just happen casually. It happens on a very intimate level. You have to have a relationship with this person. Obviously, the classic example would be Jesus with his 12 disciples. He lived with these people. He ate meals with them. He worked with them. He ministered with them. He traveled with them. I mean, they were intensely in a relationship. So this is part of the breakdown when we think that a pastor, it's just a pastor's job to care for the spiritual well-being of everybody in the church. No, it's your responsibility. It's your responsibility to care about your own walk with the Lord, and that might entail doing that with another person, somebody who's more mature, maybe coming alongside, or if you're mature, coming alongside somebody who's weaker in the faith or not as far along in the faith. But that has to entail, it might not be obviously dinner every night together, but it has to entail these regular hangouts. Like, one of the things that we've, in my group of friends, we've really tried to stress is the importance of just hanging out with people. And that's what the tragedy is because that often gets poo-pooed. It often gets talked about like we don't have time for that. And it gets tougher too as you become an adult. You become an adult, you have a career, you have a life, maybe you get married, and now family life comes first and everything. Like that idea of I'm just going to go hang out with the guys. I'm going to just go hang out with my friend. We're going to go get some coffee. It's like, no, that's not valuable. There's not enough time for that in my life. If that's your mentality, that's going to be your mentality when you get married. And it's like, okay, we need to have regular time together to just catch up at the end of the day and to have a meal together. It's like, we don't have time for that. We have got more important things. Well, that's going to cause a breakdown in your marriage, and that's going to cause a breakdown in your spiritual life as a single person if you don't have that regular time where you're building those relationships with people, other people in the body of Christ. So I always do like to encourage people, if you're looking to get married, look for somebody who's doing this already. They don't have to be doing it perfectly, obviously, but somebody who values this already, this idea of discipleship and investing in other people. If they're not doing that as a single person, why would you think that would change as a married person. Women looking for a husband, if he is supposed to love you like Christ loves the church and nurture you and cleanse you with the washing of the word and all of the stuff, if he's not doing that or concerned about that as a single person, why would he suddenly shift? I mean, people do change. I don't want to necessarily discount that, but typically a good indicator of future behavior is current and past behavior. If he's not doing that as a single person, if he's not engaged in discipleship, what makes you think he's going to disciple your children? It's a worthy question to ask. So let me jump back in here, and then we'll respond to something else they're saying.
So I have to know what story you're acting out right now, and so do you. And in order for you to know that, and for me to know it, you have to be able to tell your story. And I have to be able to ask you questions about it. And then I think the other thing that's really important about the shared meal is that, human beings are really weird creatures because we seriously share food and we're social eaters. People don't eat well if they eat on their own. And so it's deeply rooted into us, that idea of sharing food. And so part of the extended process of socialization is to get everybody to sit down around food, to be polite and thankful for the fact of the food, to enjoy that, but then also to be able to give and take while that's being shared. And that's, I would say, if the most fundamental element of socialization is something like the embodiment of rough and tumble play, the next layer on top of that would be the ability to sit down and share food and have civilized discourse.
Okay, so this is very important. Actually, this and listening to this, it actually reminded me just yesterday. It's so true. I just had lunch with friends of mine that go to the church, and we went out to the Chinese buffet. And going to a Chinese buffet is a dangerous thing. I mean, you can because it does fill you up quickly. I mean, that's kind of like the notorious thing about Chinese food. But man, at a buffet, you can put it away before you get full. And we'll go to a buffet. You can put down. Usually, I can eat 2 plates of food. But the people I was with, they only had 1 plate of food, and that was odd because one guy is like he eats, and so we were kind of laughing about that. But it did kind of make me realize, well, I don't want to go up there and make them have to wait for me to eat another plate of food while they're not eating. So I'll just have 1 plate of food, which is probably the reasonable thing to do, right? So you just have 1 plate of food. That's what he's talking about. It socializes you. I don't want to be some weird dude who's stuffing my face with a second plate of food while they're just sitting there waiting for me to get done so we can pay our bill and leave. I want to be respectful, and really I don't need to have that second plate of food. I'm technically full now. I might not feel it, but and so even that simple interaction as a group, as a tiny community, it socializes you. It does something to you that doesn't happen on an individual level. So why having these communal meals, which, in the biblical times, I mean, that was a huge part of hospitality. That was a huge part of the centrality of the church. When a local church got together, it was around a meal. I mean, there was a love feast is what they called it, where they shared love with one another. But it was centered around food.
If you've been a listener of Faith in Focus for a while, I would encourage you to become a supporter of the ministry by becoming a monthly donor. Your generous donations allow me to continue working with InFaith and recording new content. You can find a link to my donation page in the show notes for this episode. Thank you.
And again, as single people, this has to be a part of discipleship. Is not just teaching somebody the Bible. I mean, obviously that's a part of it. Knowledge has to play a part of it. But that isn't all discipleship is. If discipleship is just teaching somebody the Bible an hour or 2 a week, that doesn't require a relationship to do that. I can just send somebody a podcast once a week and say, "Here, listen to this," and call that disciple. That's not discipleship. And looking back on my life, my pastor, who his family invested in me and really discipled me, the reality of it was most of it happened around, after Sunday, we'd all go over to their house. A bunch of us young teenage kids would go to their house, and, we would have 20 people cram-packed around a table. It was loud, it was noisy, and we would just talk about anything. There was no structure to it, but we were just reflecting on things. Maybe somebody's complaining about work or their boss, and then you get to hear people weigh in and say, well, when my boss does that, here's how I respond. I, cuss them out to my other employees. That's probably not a really good idea. How would, and it forces people, warts and all, to really talk and and engage and let their guard down, really. This is another reason why I try to practice and try to encourage people that, like, friendship, like dating in the modern world is fine. I mean, it's challenging, but really it's valuable to be friends with somebody before you start dating them. Because when you're friends with somebody and there's no motive of dating, if you're thinking, hey, this person I might want to try to impress and date them, you're always going to be performing and acting. You're never letting your guard down, right? When you're friends and there is no motivation, you are just yourself, and they get to see who you really are. And I think that's helpful. But when you're having these meals and it's just relaxed and you're just hanging out, again, going back to us kind of poo-pooing in the church, like the value of hanging out with the guys or going out, with the girls and going shopping or whatever it is that girls do. That kind of thing, well, we don't have time for that. We're adults now. We've got family. We've got whatever. It's like, you better figure out how to make time for that, because it's in those situations that the iron sharpens the iron, that you learn what it means to behave like Christ. So in a discipleship relationship, I was just talking to somebody the other day that if you're going shopping, why not just invite a friend along with you to do that thing? And this is tough if you're an introvert, because you just want to have that time. But you know what? Get over it. And you might think, well, this is not very valuable. And if you call somebody and maybe they're married, a husband has got a wife and a kid, and hey, Dennis wants me to go shopping with him. It's like, come on, like, we don't have time for that. And I understand married time is a little bit more difficult. You do have to schedule things a little bit more. You can't just drop everything and go. But to poo-poo that as if that's not important, like, I need somebody that I'm mentoring to see how I respond when I'm driving behind this person driving, 60 miles an hour in the fast lane. They have to see how I respond to that, and how I respond when I fail and act inappropriately. They need to be aware of that. That's not something that you can teach to somebody just in an intellectual setting. So in a family where really this serious discipleship of young children and discipling one another, husband and wives, and sharpening one another, this is why the communal meal, that's what's happening at that meal. It's not anything that's magical about the meal itself. It's the interactions that are happening at that meal that are so significant. You're learning certain things about one another. So again, I think that we have to teach people at a young age. We have to teach as a single person. We have to learn these skills and be okay with practicing these skills. And again, because making disciples is the only thing that we're supposed to be doing here on the earth. Just as a digression, we were talking about this at church this past week, and my friends were talking about it the week before. That's why we ended up talking about it at church. In the Great Commission, when Jesus says, all authority has been given to me on heaven and earth, therefore go and make disciples, he's not encouraging you with the fact that, hey, you can do this. If you want to make disciples, well, by golly, I've got all the power in the universe, and I'll help you do it. That's not what he's saying, and this was kind of a revelation to me. I'd never read it this way. He's saying, all authority on heaven and earth has been given to me. I literally have the power and authority of God, and I am telling you, go and make disciples. I mean, this is a command. He is, as the Lord, telling you this is what your obligation is to go make disciples. So whatever you do in your job, your life, your family, I want to get married, I want to have kids, I want to do this job, I want to do that job, I want to homeschool, I don't want to homeschool. All of these decisions you might make are subservient to making disciples and being discipled. That has to be paramount, and everything else gets fit in around that. This is not the job for the pastor. Jesus tells everybody. The book of Jude says all the saints are entrusted with contending for the faith. So learning these skills is essential. It's probably better to learn them as a single person, where the stakes aren't so high, right? I mean, it's still important. These are still issues of eternity, and people's eternal lives are at stake. But if my friendship breaks up, that does hurt, but it's not the same as a marriage falling apart, right? And this is why, too, in counseling, not all the time, But some of the times when people come to me for counseling, and when they go to anyone for counseling, I know I'm not unique in this, it's when everything has fallen apart. They are at the end of season 5 of Breaking Bad, that level of bad. Everything is completely fallen apart. They are about to die. Their relationship's about to fall apart. And the thing I think is, and this is not a condemnatory thing. I certainly don't say this to people. But the thing is like, you think, man, you needed to be talking to somebody 5 years ago or 10 years ago. This is really far, you're really far gone now. And this is going to take, and I think people think, oh, this should just be an easy fix. And it's not. It's an easy fix when you're having the communal dinner. That's where the maintenance, it's like maintaining a car, right? Oil changes are annoying. Either yourself, you got to take 30, 45 minutes to change your oil, or you got to go into the local oil change place and risk them not putting your oil cap back on and your engine explodes. Sorry, I'm being a little salty. But those things are annoying. They cost money. They take time. It's like, I got to fit this in now. But don't do that. Don't change your oil. You're going to have bigger problems. Your engine's just going to explode, and now you're going to be out of car. So when you go in and your car is just, your engine is completely seized up, and the mechanic's like, why did you not go in for oil changes? Well, I just didn't have time for it. I just could never fit it into my budget. That's a problem. So the same thing with the communal meals. Well, if you've been doing those little acts of maintenance along the way, you might not have been where you are now. And so I won't necessarily delve into any more with the Jordan Peterson clip, but I do want to read a little bit of this from Gottman. I'll share this link. This comes from Gottman's website, and it's an article by a guy named Christopher Dollard, who works for the Gottman Institute. And again, this speaks to what happens in these hangouts, these communal meals, where you're just getting together and basically catching up. How was your week? What's been going on in your life? Ideally, if you're married, you're seeing each other every day, so you can do this every day. But he talks about your emotional bank account and these little things that you do to deposit into your emotional bank account or to make withdrawals from it. So he says, did you know that the number one thing couples fight about is nothing? After observing thousands of couples in our love lab, this is a kind of a scientific bed and breakfast that Gottman has set up for like 20, 30 years. He studies these people over the course of a week or weekends or whatever. But for more than 4 decades, we've discovered that couples were not arguing about specific topics like finance, sex, parenting, or dealing with difficult in-laws. Instead, they're fighting about a failure to emotionally connect and likely didn't even know it. We realized, however, instead of having productive conflict discussions about tangible issues, couples were really arguing about how one partner may not pay much attention to the other's needs or may not express much interest in things that their partner cares about. While the science behind what drives couples to lose their emotional connection can be quite complex, we use a simple concept that can help couples reconnect the emotional bank account. So they talk about turning towards instead of turning away. And he says, imagine that you and your partner are watching a TV show together after dinner, and your partner discovers some bad news about one of their friends. You can do one of two things: turn towards or turn away. Turning towards can be as simple as acknowledging that what your partner has said to you. You could say something like, oh, that's awful, I'm sorry to hear that. That kind of response will let your partner know that you've listened and care about what they have to say, which will help build up positivity in your relationship. Or you could say nothing and continue to watch TV. That would be turning away from your partner, and it won't make your partner feel heard or understood. So it's just like, whatever, it's not a big deal, get over it. That kind of mentality. So these little tiny things, they're deposits or withdrawals into your emotional bank account. And as we'll go on, we'll see that does damage to a relationship. That hurts a relationship. And what they've found is it's relationships that do that consistently over time that either strengthen or weaken a marriage. And again, for single people, this happens in relationships, just friendships. You can do this in friendships. You probably have dealt with this, right? You're pouring out your heart to a friend, and they're just like, well, I mean, I guess that sucks. And then they offer no condolences. They don't offer you a hug. They don't They don't check in on you after, you've shared your heart. All of these different things, these things happen. And these are skills. These are relationship skills. Going back to what Andy Stanley said, these are just people problems that we carry into marriage. Somebody who has these problems in marriage had these problems before marriage. But it's before marriage that really we should have really been working on these things. But, okay, think of it this way. How would you feel if you expressed something that you care about to your partner and they didn't respond at all? You probably wouldn't feel very good. But if your partner gave an indication that they're listening to you and that they care about what you have to say, you will likely feel connected to your partner. It's important to remember that most acts of turning toward are small, everyday gestures of appreciation, understanding, affection, and kindness. Even if your partner says something like, hey, look at that rainbow outside, and you respond with something very simple like, oh, that's nice, that's an act of turning towards. And they talk about the emotional bank account. Essentially, when you turn towards your partner's bid for connection, that's what they're doing. Oh, look at that rainbow. They're wanting to connect with you about something small. You're making a deposit in your emotional bank account. And when you turn away from your partner, you make a withdrawal. Just like a real bank account, a zero balance is trouble. And a negative balance is a real danger zone. An emotional bank account grows when partners make more deposits than withdrawal. In a 6-year follow-up study of newlywed couples who remain married turned towards their partner's bids of emotional connection 86% of the time in their lab, while those who divorced averaged 33%. The difference between happy and unhappy couples is how they managed their emotional bank account. When the emotional bank account is in the red, partners tend to question each other's intentions and feel disconnected or even lonely. But when the emotional bank account is in the black, partners tend to give each other the benefit of the doubt during conflict. They keep their relationships in the positive perspective. So again, this is the dinner. Having the dinner every day it's like your oil change on your car. It's just a little thing. Sure, it costs you some time. It costs you some emotional energy maybe, but not that significant of ones. They're just little things. Oh, this meal was great. Thanks, honey. I really appreciate it. Oh, thanks for doing the dishes. Just little things like that. These little conflicts, they don't cost you anything, or they cost you minimal, next to nothing. But these are the things that sustain or break a marriage. And it's true of relationships. Again, I can't stress this enough. These are skills that can be learned when you're single and need to be learned when you're single. If they're not learned when you're single, they're often learned the hard way in marriage. And so they talk about the 5-to-1 ratio. Again, we have another concept that's easy to remember, the magic relationship ratio of 5-to-1. 5-to-1 what? Well, an act of turning towards, no matter how small or subtle, is a positive interaction. An act of turning away is a negative interaction. There are 3 key takeaways to help you manage your emotional bank account. 1, to be satisfied in a relationship, couples must focus on increasing deposits, positive interactions, and minimizing withdrawals, negative interactions. 2, during conflict, 5 positive interactions to every 1 negative interaction. So when it's tense, the desire is to criticize and to nitpick and to make digs at the other person, but it's like, nope. That's when tensions are really high. You have to be very intentional about doing positive things. One of the things they don't talk about in this article is, but he talks about in his book, is ways couples resolve conflict. And couples negotiate this, whether they know it or not, in subtle ways. They have their own way. It doesn't necessarily matter how you do it. It could all, it's kind of funny when you read it. He says he has seen couples that are very strong in marriage, and the way that they resolve their conflict is just basically by saying, like, you're ridiculous. I don't want to listen to you anymore. Fine. I think you're ridiculous too. Bye. I love you. And they kind of like have these like little insults to each other. I love you. Walk away. Boom. That sounds like it's like, well, you didn't resolve that tension. No, they did. That's how they resolved it. So it's kind of interesting. But those positive interactions, the way you resolve conflict, the way you deal with conflict, 5-to-1. This is the third one. During everyday life, 20 positive interactions to every 1 negative interaction. Why the difference? Because when couples are in the heat of conflict, they are already in a negative state of mind, so the added negativity is expected. This 5-to-1 ratio does suggest that you still need to say and do 5 positive things for every negative thing, even during an argument. That sounds challenging, right? But try reframing your approach to conflict. You don't necessarily have to be agreeable or overly accommodating, but you should turn towards your partner, listen to them, ask them to tell you more, validate their perspective, express empathy. If you can do those 5 things during a conflict discussion, even if you disagree with your partner and find this issue to be reoccurring or unsolvable, which most problems in a relationship are due to personality differences, that's 5 positive interactions. On the other hand, so that might look like, honey, what you're doing frustrates me. I don't understand it, but I appreciate that you're passionate about that. Like, that's taking something that's negative. You're not necessarily compromising and letting yourself be defeated. You're saying, hey, listen, we don't agree on this, but I'm glad that you're passionate about it. It's reaffirming them. On the other hand, when you're going through your day and you're suddenly interrupted by a negative interaction with your partner, it has a much bigger impact on your emotional bank account. Positive interactions are small, consistent deposits, but negative interactions are big withdrawals, and too many of them can erase a positive balance. Usually negative things are not asymmetrical with positive things. What I always tell people is you can tell the truth 99 times, but you lie once, people distrust you. That doesn't seem fair, because it's like, well, 99% of the time I'm telling you the truth. Yeah, but that lie is not asymmetrical with the truth. And then he says, and this is so important, remember that grand gestures aren't the goal here. An emotionally wealthy marriage is not cultivated during a 2-week vacation to Hawaii. Instead, it's built on a daily routine of positive habits and interactions. For many couples, just realizing that they shouldn't take their everyday interactions for granted makes an enormous difference in their relationship. So why this meal? Why this time where you're getting together with your spouse, your family, your friend, you're just hanging out in discipleship, you're just getting together, maybe not intentionally doing things spiritual, but you're just spending time together, is it's building this emotional bank account. You're able to make these deposits. You're able to learn the skills. Early in marriage, you might not have these skills of how to interact with your spouse, but practicing doing these things at the around the dinner table, having that time for 15 minutes. Maybe it's not dinner. Maybe you guys don't have dinner. Maybe you have breakfast. Maybe breakfast is where you do this. Maybe it's not a meal at all, but it's just 15 minutes at the end of the day. You sit down on the couch together with a cup of coffee before you turn on Netflix or whatever, and you're just catching up. What happened during your day? So you're learning about what is going on in this person's life, and you're able to respond. And also, you may mess it up. You may, this magic ratio or whatever, of course this is not a law, it's not a legalistic thing, but this principle that they've learned, you may mess it up once a day, or for 1 day, or 2 days, or 3 days, but that's fine. That's not going to ruin your marriage. You can just get right back on the horse and try the next day. It's like going to the gym, right? You might miss a gym day, but that's not going to ruin your workout regimen. But you do that enough times, it is going to ruin that. So I really appreciated that video by Jordan Peterson. It just reminded me of the importance of hanging out. Again, as a single person, obviously it's not family dinner time, but it's hanging out. And maybe you're single and you think, yeah, I don't have a family. Well, having that time with your friends and valuing that's not a waste of time. And it's not something that has to stop or should stop when you get married. Those things are still important. So part of discipleship, part of maturity in Christ is having those times where we're just sharing life with one another. Maybe it's having a meal. Maybe it's just getting coffee. Maybe it's coming over and playing video games, playing board games, whatever it is. It's allowing you a window into what's going on in my life, what's going on in my story. You're able to see, to go back to the TV show and the story illustration, you're able to get a window. It's one episode. It's a day of this story of my life, and it's able to catch you up. What's going on in this person's life? And you can ask, you have that opportunity. What's going on? How was work? What's going on at work? The stress with your employee, your stress with your spouse. What is going on? You're able to catch up on all those things. So I would encourage you, value those things. Don't disregard them as unimportant. And I think that they will help you in the long run. If you get married, if you're not married and you start doing these things, it will help. And they will also help you learn skills that are important in discipleship, and then ultimately in discipling each other as spouses and discipling and raising your children. So that's what I have for you today. Hope you enjoyed it. Have a good one.
While Faith in Focus is a ministry of InFaith, the views and opinions expressed in this podcast do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of InFaith as a mission.